Hey everyone, if you enjoy my park ranger horror stories, I've started uploading them on Spotify too. My YouTube channel got demonetized, so I'm putting a lot more focus into Spotify now. You'll find daily scary stories there with longer, darker, and more immersive horror content. If you want to support the channel, please go follow the Spotify page and leave a 5-star rating. It genuinely helps me keep making these stories. The Spotify link is in the description and pinned comment. Turn off the lights. Put on your headphones and I'll see you there. My name is Patricia Ashford Murphy, though most people who know me just call me Patty. I'm a ranger with the U.S. Forest Service, and I've been doing this job for 17 years. That's a long time to spend in the woods, watching trees grow and die, managing land that most people will never see. I work in the Tongass National Forest in Alaska, specifically in the Misty Fjords region near Ketchikan. It's beautiful country, the kind of place that makes you feel small. The trees here are massive, Sitka spruce and hemlock that are over 300 years old, taller than office buildings, so thick with branches and moss that sometimes you can only see 15 feet in front of you, even in the middle of the day. The ground is always wet. Always. There's peat moss 4 feet deep in some places, and it rains every few days. In June, when this story starts, the sun barely sets at all. We get 18 hours of daylight, but it's usually hidden behind fog and mist rolling in from the ocean. I grew up between two worlds. My mother was Tlingit, part of the indigenous people who have lived in this land for 10,000 years. My father was Irish, a commercial fisherman who came north and never left. I lost him when I was young, and my mother raised me with stories about the forest and the spirits that live in it. She taught me the old ways. The respect you have to show the land. She died when I was 22, a stroke, sudden and final. I became a ranger because I wanted to honor what she taught me. I wanted to protect these forests the way my ancestors did, not by cutting them down, but by keeping them alive. The irony is, my job involved a lot of paperwork and management. Not as poetic as I'd hoped, but it was important work. By June of 2001, I was 44 years old. I had been married once to a fisherman like my father. He died in an accident when I was 26. I never remarried. Instead, I married the forest. That probably sounds strange to people who don't understand. But when you spend this much time in one place, when you know every creek and ridge and hidden valley, it becomes part of you. My ranger station was on the edge of the Punchbowl Inlet, about 40 minutes by boat from any real help. I had radio contact with other stations, but if something went wrong, I was alone. I'd accepted that years ago. The isolation didn't bother me. Sometimes I went weeks without seeing another person. I need to be clear about something. I believed in the stories my mother told me. The old Tlingit stories about spirits living in the forest, about guardians that protected sacred places. But I thought they were metaphors, you know? Beautiful stories that taught lessons about respect and nature. I didn't believe in literal spirits that could kill people. I was a scientist. I believed in ecology, in animal behavior, in things I could measure and study. I'm telling you this so you understand I wasn't superstitious. I wasn't looking for ghosts. What happened to me wasn't because I wanted to believe. It happened because the truth forced itself on me. The Misty Fjords region is protected land. You're not supposed to log there. But there's always money to be made if you know how to hide your tracks. In the first week of June, I noticed signs of illegal logging activity about 2 miles from my station. Fresh sawdust, equipment marks, newly cut stumps in a grove that should have been off limits. I reported it to the Forest Service office. I filed the proper complaints. I told them exactly where to look. They said they'd send investigators. They said it would take a few days, but even in those first few days, before anything happened, something felt wrong. The loggers didn't care much about official paperwork. They worked fast, cutting maybe a dozen trees before anyone official showed up. They were targeting old-growth spruce, the kind that can be sold for premium prices. Each tree they cut was probably 200, 300 years old. Trees that had been growing since before my country even existed. On June 8th, I found the first body. His name was Marcus Webb. He was a logger, 28 years old, from Oregon. His crew had set up a temporary camp about a quarter mile into the grove. I found him at dawn when I went to document the damage. I won't describe every detail, but I'll tell you enough so you understand what I'm dealing with. His body was covered with deep cuts. Not ordinary cuts. These were consistent with something wrapping around him and squeezing, hard. The pattern suggested it had happened slowly, in stages. The tent was intact. There were no signs of struggle. Whatever did this, he hadn't fought it, or couldn't. The Forest Service called it an animal attack. Maybe a bear, they said. But I knew better. Our black bears don't kill like that. The marks were too precise, too uniform, too deliberate. I kept my mouth shut about what I really thought. Who would believe me? 3 days later, they found the second body. Robert Castellano, 34, married with 2 kids. They found him hanging from a massive hemlock, suspended about 8 feet off the ground by thick vines wrapped around his chest and neck. The vines had left deep grooves in the bark of the tree, suggesting they'd been there a long time. But the medical examiner said he'd been dead less than 24 hours. The weird part, and this is what got to me, the vines were gone by the time the investigators showed up. The body was still hanging there, but whatever had held him in place had released him. It was like something had deliberately left him there for us to find, then let him go. The logging company was getting nervous now. 2 deaths in 5 days. The official story was unknown wildlife incident, but the workers didn't believe it. I talked to some of them. They told me things they wouldn't put in official reports. We could hear something moving at night, one guy told me. Not normal animal sounds, more like wet sounds, like something heavy dragging through vegetation. My buddy said he heard voices, another said, in the trees, speaking in a language he didn't understand, but it was singing, kind of, beautiful but wrong. I felt watched, a third man said, and he was shaking when he said it. Not like being hunted, like being studied, like something was curious about us. The third death came on June 12th. The foreman, David Halloway, 42 years old. They found him at dawn in the center of the protected grove, standing in the middle of a perfect circle of tree stumps. The stumps they'd cut that week, arranged in a ring around him. But here's the thing, he wasn't dead yet. He was still alive when they found him, but something was happening to him. His skin had a grayish-green tint. Thin strands of something were visible under his skin, spreading from his legs upward. The medical team said it was a fungal infection, accelerated somehow, spreading through his entire body at an impossible rate. He lived for 3 more days in the hospital before it took him completely. Before he died, he said things, fragmented things. He kept talking about the mother of the forest, about singing in the dark, about being chosen. The logging company packed up that day and left. They just abandoned the whole operation. You don't come back after 3 workers die in a week. Even if you're not superstitious, you leave. But by then, I was already terrified, because I'd started researching. I'd found the old ranger journals in the archives. The journals weren't hard to find if you knew where to look. Forest Service records going back 50 years. And there were entries about this exact grove, about deaths that followed the same pattern. In 1952, 3 workers died. In 1959, 2 workers. In 1966, 4 workers. Every 7 years, almost exactly, someone tried to log that grove. And every 7 years, people died. The last journal entry was from a ranger named Thomas Mackenzie in 1978. He wrote, "I have decided not to pursue formal investigation into the deaths at Punchbowl Inlet. The pattern is clear, and the conclusion is impossible. I have consulted with the Tlingit elders, particularly Elder Harold Tlingit, who confirmed what I suspected. The grove is sacred. It has always been sacred. What lives there is not evil in the way we understand evil. It is protective. The forest is protecting its own. If we do not harvest there, it will not hunt us. That is the agreement. That is the understanding. I have marked this area as permanently restricted. Future rangers should read this entry and understand. Some boundaries exist for a reason. Some things are sacred because they are dangerous. Sacred because they are dangerous." I read those words again and again. I wanted to dismiss it as the superstitious rambling of an old ranger, but I couldn't, because I'd spent 17 years in this forest. I'd felt things that science couldn't explain. I'd found animal remains arranged in patterns too deliberate to be natural. I'd walked through sections of forest where everything went quiet, where the birds stopped singing and the insects went silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I decided I needed to understand what was protecting that grove. I started asking the Tlingit elders I knew, my mother's people. At first they wouldn't talk about it. It wasn't their place to share, they said. But eventually, old Mary Cowie, who was in her 90s and had known my mother, agreed to speak with me. "Your mother knew about the Guardian. She told me over tea in her kitchen in Ketchikan. She never would have harvested from that place. No one in our community would. It's been protected for 10,000 years because the Guardian will not allow it to be harmed. It is patient most of the time. It waits. But when someone cuts the old ones, it remembers. It remembers every insult, every tree that shouldn't have fallen. And when it wakes, it hunts." "What is it?" I asked. "A spirit of the forest," she said, "very old, older than our people. My grandmother's grandmother was told it came from the land itself. that it grew from the ground like the trees grow. It is the forest's way of protecting itself. How do I stop it? She looked at me for a long time. You don't stop it, you respect it. You keep people away from the sacred place. You honor the boundary. But the boundary had been broken, the trees had been cut. The spirit was awake now, and I could feel it. In the days after the loggers left, I noticed the wrongness spreading. It wasn't just in the protected grove anymore. It was moving through the forest around it. I'd find animal remains arranged in impossible patterns. A deer, perfectly arranged with its bones positioned like an artistic display. A group of ravens, arranged in a circle around a central point. These weren't kill zones. They were arrangements, collections. One night, I heard something moving around my station. Not a normal forest sound. Wet, heavy, patient. I looked out the window and saw shapes moving in the mist. But when I tried to focus on them, they'd vanish. When I turned back to look straight ahead, I could swear they were in my peripheral vision, just barely there. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours reading the old journals, trying to understand what I was dealing with. The thing that terrified me most wasn't the violence. It was the deliberation. Whatever was in that forest, it wasn't acting on animal instinct. It was thinking. It was planning. It was hunting with purpose. By June 18th, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't call in help. Who would believe me? I couldn't ignore it. It was getting closer. So I made a decision that probably sounds crazy. I decided to confront it. I prepared carefully. I brought offerings, traditional Tlingit items my mother had left me. Carved cedar, woven baskets, smudged sage. I wore clothes that would get me through the forest. I brought a flashlight, though I knew it wouldn't help much. And I brought my mother's prayer book, written in Tlingit, with protection prayers she'd taught me. I walked into the sacred grove at dusk on June 18th. The forest was different in there, darker, even with the perpetual Alaskan twilight. The air was thick, harder to breathe. The mist was denser, with a slightly greenish tint that made the whole world feel sick. Every step made sound, the wet ground squelching beneath my boots, my clothes brushing against branches. Sounds that would normally fade into the forest felt magnified, drawing attention. I walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Time moved differently in that place. Eventually, I reached the center, a clearing surrounded by the stumps of freshly cut trees. And then the mist moved, not like wind, like something intelligent was pushing it aside. The air grew cold. The smell came first, deep forest smell, but overwhelming. Rich decay, growing things, fungal growth, the smell of a forest floor after rain, but stronger, almost nauseating. The figure materialized slowly. I can't describe it in a way that will make sense, so I'll just tell you what I saw. It was 9 feet tall, maybe taller. Its body was made of the forest. Branches formed a skeleton, held together by vines that moved like muscles. Moss covered everything like skin, thick and wet and dark green. Its hair was made of hanging roots and vines that moved with their own life. Where its face should be, there were fungal growths that somehow formed features, eye-like shapes, something like a mouth, textures and patterns that hurt to look at. It moved like a plant moves, but it could move fast when it wanted to. And it reeked. Not an unpleasant smell, that's what made it worse. It smelled like the deepest, richest part of the forest. Like growth and decay and life and death happening at the same time. It spoke. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes it sounded like wind through trees. Sometimes like water running over stones. And sometimes it sounded like words. Ashford, it said, you have the smell of her, the priestess. It was calling me by my mother's name, or rather, referring to my mother. You're the guardian, I said. My voice shook. You're protecting the grove. Protecting, it said, and there was something almost amused in the way it said it. What else would I do? These trees were here before your people. They will be here after your people are gone. They do not belong to you. They belong to the earth that grew them. The vines moved closer. I could feel the air shifting around them. The ones who cut, it continued. They took without asking. They took without respecting. The earth does not allow this. They're gone now, I said. They've stopped. The grove will be protected. Yes, it said. Because I showed them what the earth protects. But you, and here the vines reached closer, wrapping around my legs. You have the blood of my priestess. Your mother knew the way. She taught you. Yet you let them come. You did not stop them. The vines pulled, and I fell to my knees. They were cold and wet and stronger than anything human. I could feel them trying to pull me deeper into the forest, into itself. I opened my mouth and did the only thing I could think of. I started praying, in Tlingit, the words my mother taught me. Ancient prayers for protection, for clarity, for respect. The vines hesitated. I kept praying. I recited every prayer she'd ever taught me. I called on the ancestors. I acknowledged the sacred nature of the grove and the spirit protecting it. I showed respect the way the old people did. Slowly, incredibly, the vines released me. The spirit pulled back. For a moment, I could almost see something like understanding in those fungal eye shapes. "You remember," it said. "You remember the way." "I remember," I gasped. "I will protect it, I promise you. No one will harvest here again." The spirit was quiet for a long moment. Then it said something that I'll never forget. "There are so few humans who remember anymore. So few who understand that the earth is alive, that it speaks, that it protects what is its own." The vines moved gently now, almost cautiously, and began to wrap around my legs one more time. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay still. I trusted what my mother had taught me. I trusted in respect and in the old ways. The vines covered my legs, then slowly began to retreat. Where they touched, I felt a burning sensation, like contact with something radioactive. Except instead of heat, it was like contact with pure life. When they finally released me, my legs were covered in painful burns that would never fully heal. The spirit began to dissolve back into the mist. Its last words came as the fog swallowed it completely. "Keep the boundary. Protect the priestess's daughter. And remember, some things are sacred because they are dangerous." I made it out of the grove as darkness finally fell for the first time that season. My legs were screaming in pain, blistered and burned. I nearly collapsed twice before I reached my station. I spent the next 3 days treating the burns, though I knew nothing would completely heal them. The skin healed, but the scars remained, permanent marks of contact with something that shouldn't exist. By June 21st, I'd filed official reports recommending the entire Misty Fjords area be permanently closed to all commercial activity. I cited ecological concerns, endangered species habitat, indigenous cultural preservation. All true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was classified, buried in archives. The official story became dangerous wildlife habitat and increased protection for indigenous heritage sites. The logging company never returned. The workers who survived never talked about what really happened. I think they all went through what I went through, knowing something impossible, but having no way to prove it or explain it. As for me, I kept my promise. I spent the rest of my career protecting those forests. I worked with the Tlingit elders to restore the old boundary markers. We planted ceremonial areas to honor the sacred places. I documented every ecological reason to keep people away, which turned out to be plenty. The forest in that region was thriving like nowhere else, with species diversity and growth rates that made botanists scratch their heads. I still feel the burns on my legs. 17 years later, they still itch on certain days. On those days, I think about the spirit in the forest. I think about my mother and the knowledge she tried to pass on. I never saw the spirit again after that night, but I felt it sometimes. A presence in the forest, watching, patient, waiting. You know what I learned from all this? My mother was right all along. Some things are sacred because they're dangerous. Some spirits are real and they deserve respect. And some forests remember every tree that falls. Before I retire next year, I'm leaving detailed instructions for the next ranger who takes this post. I'm writing it all down, the history, the patterns, the agreement I made with the spirit of Punchbowl Inlet. The forest is alive. It's always been alive. And it's very, very good at protecting what belongs to it. My name is Richardson Hawthorne, but everyone calls me Rich. I'm 50 years old, and I've spent the last 22 years as a ranger in the gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska. What I'm about to tell you happened in the late summer of 1996. I've never talked about it publicly before, but I'm getting older, and the truth deserves to be heard. I chose this job because I wanted to disappear. Not in the way you might think. I didn't run here to die. I ran here because dying seemed less painful than staying where everyone knew my name and my failures. My marriage had fallen apart. My son wouldn't speak to me. The military had finished with me after 20 years of teaching Arctic survival to soldiers who would probably never need it. So when the Park Service offered me the remote position in Friedman Valley, 120 miles from the nearest town, reachable only by plane or helicopter, I took it without thinking twice. The cabin sits in a vast empty place. Imagine looking in every direction and seeing mountains, tundra, and sky. No roads, no neighbors, no one can just drop by. In summer, the sun barely sets. In winter, it barely rises. By August, when this story really begins, the Arctic summer was already dying. The endless daylight was fading fast, and we were losing 2 minutes of light every single day. I'd been there 3 years by 1996. Long enough to know the place, long enough to read its moods. The valley had never felt dangerous to me before. Harsh, yes. Empty, absolutely. But not wrong. The wilderness has rules, and I understood them. Wolves hunt. You don't bother them. Bears search for food. You make noise and keep your distance. The tundra will kill you if you're stupid, but it doesn't have intentions. It just is. In late August that year, something changed. I noticed it first in the animals. The caribou herds, which usually move through our region in predictable patterns, started behaving strangely. They'd bolt without reason. They'd gather in tight clusters and just stand there, facing one direction, their ears back. The wolves, we had a pack that lived about 10 miles north, went completely quiet. I'd lived here long enough to know wolf sounds. The Arctic is noisy if you listen right. Wind, water, animals calling. But for 3 days, nothing. The silence was wrong. I had a research team with me that year. Christina Ellsworth, a wildlife biologist, David Mulford, a grad student helping with caribou population counts, and a couple of young assistants. We'd set up a camp about 15 miles from my cabin to study predator-prey relationships. I visited twice a week, bringing supplies and checking their work. On August 22nd, when I arrived at their camp, I knew something was bad. David was standing outside, looking exhausted. He hadn't shaved in days, and his hands were shaking while he held his coffee cup. "We have a problem," he said, "a serious one." He walked me to a ridge overlooking a valley they were monitoring. 3 caribou lay there, scattered about 50 yards apart. They'd been dead at least 2 days. Anything that kills in the Arctic doesn't stay long. Other animals eat the bodies, but these 3 weren't touched. That alone was strange. What was stranger was how they'd been killed. "Look at the bodies," David said quietly. The caribou weren't just killed. They'd been carefully taken apart. The hearts and livers were missing, removed with something like surgical precision. The kills weren't messy. They were methodical. I'd seen predator kills before. Wolves rip and tear. Bears slash. This was different. This was controlled. "What predator does that?" David asked. "None that I know," I said. I was lying a little. The truth was, I didn't want to think about what kind of predator does anything like that. "There's more," David said. He showed me tracks near the kill site. Large paw prints deep in the soil. The stride length was impossible. Each step was almost 4 feet. No animal I knew made tracks like that. And mixed with the paw prints were marks I'd never seen before. What looked like handprints, but with something wrong about the spacing of the fingers. "I measured everything," David said. "These tracks suggest an animal may be 7, 8 feet tall. Walking on all fours sometimes, but these prints, the hand prints, suggest it sometimes stands up on its back legs." I told David to keep the camp locked up at night. I told him to stay alert. I promised I'd inform the Park Service and see if we could get a wildlife expert out to investigate. Then I drove back to my cabin, even though it was getting dark. I sat in that cabin for 3 hours, thinking. I'd read the historical records when I first arrived at the station. There's a file that every ranger eventually finds in the station office. Deaths, unsolved, unusual deaths, going back decades. 4 rangers and researchers, all in the same region, all decades apart, all with unusual circumstances. The file notes are vague. Officially, they died in animal attacks of undetermined predator origin. Unofficially, the notes suggested the deaths were odd enough that they weren't quite sure how to classify them. I'd read those files and dismiss them as old records from inexperienced rangers who didn't understand how dangerous the Arctic already was without. Imagining monsters. That night, sitting in my cabin listening to the wind, I didn't feel so confident. Christina Ellsworth was 32, brilliant, dedicated, and kind. She had photos of her family on her desk at the camp, parents in Denver, a sister in Seattle. She'd been so excited about this research. She loved the Arctic. She said it felt like the edge of the world, and she wanted to understand what lived in the edges. She died on August 28th. I found out when David and the assistants didn't meet me at the supply point the next morning. When I hiked to the camp, it looked quiet. Too quiet. I called out but got no answer. I found Christina first. She was still in her tent. She'd been sleeping when it came through. The tent was shredded, literally torn apart. The fabric had been ripped away, leaving a frame of broken poles. What was inside made me need to sit down and breathe very carefully. Christina was. She'd been killed by something with incredible strength and no concern for damaging its meal. But that wasn't what froze my blood. What froze it was finding her organs arranged outside the tent in a circle, not scattered, not left as they fell, arranged. Her heart and liver and lungs, positioned in a careful spiral on the tundra. It took me 3 minutes to process what that meant. Someone, or something, had killed her and deliberately arranged parts of her body. That's not predator behavior. That's behavior with intention, with meaning. I vomited. Then I called for backup. It took 4 hours for a helicopter to come. The nearest forensics team was in Fairbanks, 2 hours away. While I waited, I searched the camp. David and the assistants were gone. Their equipment was scattered. Their tents were spared. But they'd fled into the tundra. I found David first, about a mile away, hiding in a ravine. He was in shock, pale, quiet, not making sense. I got him back to the camp as the helicopter arrived. The forensics people documented everything. They had no explanation. The coroner later said that whatever killed Christina had bitten clean through her ribs and removed organs with something like intelligence. An animal that large would typically consume its kill in a more chaotic manner, the report noted carefully. This removal of specific organs suggests either human interference or an animal of unusual behavioral sophistication. They were being careful with their words. They meant, this doesn't make sense. 2 days later, they found Sam Worthington. Sam was one of our rangers, a good man in his late 40s, married with kids living in Anchorage. He'd been doing a routine solo patrol on August 30th. They found him on September 2nd at the bottom of a ravine, positioned against a large rock face like someone had carefully arranged him there. He was partially consumed, but not in the chaotic way animals usually eat. This was deliberate. His stomach contents, when they did the autopsy, showed something the medical examiner wouldn't fully explain to me at the time. But I saw the report eventually. They found human remains in Sam's stomach. Specifically, they found tissue that matched Christina's DNA. Sam had been forced to eat her. That's what the arrangement meant. The creature hadn't just killed Christina. It had left her organs as a message, or a meal preparation for later. That's when I understood we weren't dealing with a normal predator. That's when I understood we were dealing with something that understood psychology, something that knew how to make meaning from death. David was evacuated. The park leadership wanted to close the study area entirely, but they also didn't want to panic. So they issued warnings about large predator activity and brought in more rangers. That's where I got my new crew. Michael Torres, an enthusiastic young ranger from Arizona who'd never been to the Arctic before, and Susan Wells, an experienced ranger from Alaska who'd worked northern regions most of her life. We set up a rotation to watch the compound at night. I didn't sleep much. None of us did. The creature, I'd started thinking of it as a single entity now, didn't just disappear after killing Christina, Sam. It wanted to be noticed. It wanted to announce itself. By September 4th, it was circling the compound every night. We'd see tracks in the morning, large, impossible tracks walking around the perimeter. They'd circle the main cabin, the storage shed, the radio tower. Sometimes there would be scratches on the walls, gouges deep enough that you could fit your fingers in them, at a height of 8 feet. One morning we found a deer carcass placed directly in front of the cabin door, not killed nearby, placed, deliberately left for us to find. Its organs were arranged the same way. Susan started keeping a rifle with her at all times. I didn't argue with her. Michael looked terrified, which was reasonable. I was terrified too, but I had experience managing fear. On September 5th, it tried to breach the compound. I remember the sound first, a howl that I'd never heard anything produce. It wasn't wolf sound. It wasn't any animal I knew. It had almost human quality, except no human throat could make those frequencies. It made your teeth hurt to hear it. The power went out immediately, which meant the creature had brought down the line. We had backup generators, but the sudden darkness was the point. The creature wanted darkness. It came through the north wall of the main cabin, just tore it open. The wood, which should have been strong, split like balsa. Michael was in that corner of the building. He had no time to respond. The creature reached through and pulled him out into the night. He screamed, "God." The sound of a person understanding in that instant that they're about to die. And then he was gone. We sealed the doors. Susan fired at the opening, though she later admitted she couldn't see anything to aim at. The creature withdrew. By dawn, it was gone. Michael's body was found the next morning, arranged in the center of the compound, organs positioned in the same spiral. A message, a claim. That was September 6th. The Park Service decided to send an emergency evacuation helicopter. But weather rolled in, a storm system moving down from the north, bringing low clouds and high winds. No helicopter could fly in that. We were trapped. I spent that night reviewing all the old records again. The file I dismissed when I arrived. 4 deaths over 50 years. I mapped out the dates. 1957, Ranger Charles Hayes, 1968, researcher Martin Cole, 1976, no death that year, 1985, Ranger Patricia Moss Waite. Not every 11 years exactly. Let me recalculate. 1957 to 1968, 11 years, 1968 to 1985, 17 years. But maybe something happened in 1976 that wasn't reported as a death. Maybe someone Survived, 1985 to now. 11 years. If the pattern was real, we were in the window. And if the pattern held, the creature was here specifically because of the calendar. Because of hunger on a schedule. I called Susan and told her my theory. She listened without interrupting. So you think it comes back every 11 years to kill someone? She asked. I think it hunts on a cycle, I said. And we're in the cycle. Then we need to leave, Susan said. We need to try that evacuation. But the weather wouldn't clear. We were stuck until September 8th at the earliest, according to the forecast. The creature had already taken 3 people. It had made its intentions clear. On September 7th, it appeared during daylight. Susan and I were outside doing inventory, maybe 50 feet from the cabin. We both saw it at the same time, standing on a ridge about a quarter mile away. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, standing on 2 legs. The shape was wrong, too many angles, proportions that didn't match any animal I knew. Even from that distance, I could see features, antlers that spread like a crown, something like a snout, but with intelligence in the face. Real intelligence. It looked at us. I swear I felt it looking at us. It was appraising, judging. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound, not quite a howl. Something between a roar and a scream, but with structure to it, with something almost like words. It was the most disturbing sound I'd ever heard because my brain wanted to understand it. Wanted to believe it was language. Then it turned and moved back into the tundra, moving with a strange loping gait that covered ground impossibly fast. That was it, Susan said quietly. That's the thing. We went inside and locked the doors. By September 9th, the weather cleared. A helicopter could arrive by afternoon, but we had one more night. I made a decision that probably seems insane in retrospect. I decided to track it. Susan told me not to go. She was right to tell me not to go. But I couldn't just sit in that cabin waiting for it to come back. I couldn't wait for it to decide whether we lived or died based on its hunger schedule. I had a rifle, supplies, and a tracker's knowledge of the land. I had to try. If you're not back by dawn, I'm calling the evacuation early, Susan said. If I'm not back by dawn, get out, I said immediately. Don't wait for me. I followed the creature's tracks into the tundra. This was stupid. I knew it was stupid. But I've learned that sometimes you have to face the thing that frightens you, even when facing it might kill you. The tracks led north, toward the valley where the research camp had been. The creature was leading me deliberately. I understood that. It could have circled back and attacked me any time. It could have ambushed me from the rocks. Instead, it left a clear trail, almost like an invitation. It took me 3 hours to reach the valley. By that time, the Arctic light was getting strange, not quite dark, not quite light. That eerie twilight the Arctic gets in late summer. The creature was waiting in the center of the valley. Up close, in whatever light was available, I could finally see it clearly. It was roughly 10 feet tall, maybe 11. The body was a horrible combination of things. The lower half looked like a moose or elk, massive and muscular, with digitigrade feet like a wolf's. The upper half was broader, with arms that had hands with fingers spread too wide, claws extended. The antlers were the worst part. They spread 6 feet or more, but the points were arranged in an unnatural pattern, not the symmetrical crown of any normal ungulate. Its face combined predatory features with something intelligent, eyes that knew things, a snout with visible teeth. But in those eyes there was recognition, understanding. This creature wasn't an animal. It was something that had been human once, maybe, or something equally aware. It smelled like old blood and something else, something like ozone, like electricity, like winter at the end of the world. You came alone, it said. The voice wasn't from its mouth exactly. It was the howl again, those multi-layered sounds, but my brain translated it to words. It was speaking in a language beneath language, concepts arriving in my mind as meaning rather than sound. Why? I asked. Because you understand this place, it said. Because you came here to be broken, and the Arctic is breaking you properly. Because you are alone like I am alone, and hunger recognizes hunger. I raised my rifle. It didn't move. The gun will not harm me, it said. Bullets slow me, confuse me briefly. But I have eaten your kind for longer than your kind has written things down. Your weapons are toys. What are you? I asked. Old, it said. Older than your languages. I came to this place when it was colder, when ice was everything. The small peoples here, they knew to fear certain valleys. They told stories about the thing with too many teeth, the hunger walker. But your kind, modern kind, you don't listen to stories. You come to the Arctic thinking you are conquering it. I teach you that you are not. Why kill them? I asked. Why not just kill me? Because I am not finished teaching, it said. Your people think they are alone, think the Arctic is empty. I am making them remember that some places are not theirs. Some seasons belong to older things. It took a step toward me. I fired. The rifle report echoed across the tundra. The bullet hit it in the shoulder, and it screamed. That awful, multi-voiced scream, and the creature actually stumbled backward. I fired again. Once, twice, 3 times. Each bullet struck, and each time the creature made that terrible sound and moved backward. "Go," it roared, its voice shaking. "Go from this place. You have earned passage. Your blood bought it." And then it was gone. It didn't run exactly. It moved backward and just wasn't there anymore. Like it had stepped through a door I couldn't see. I stood there shaking, the rifle still raised, waiting for it to reappear. But the valley was empty except for me and the wind. I ran. I don't remember the full journey back, but I remember running, falling, scrambling up, running again. I remember my ribs hurting. I looked down later and found 4 parallel claw marks across my side, deep enough that I should have bled more than I did. The wounds were cauterized, like they'd been burned as they were made. The creature's claws were burning cold. I made it back to the compound at dawn. Susan was ready to launch the emergency evacuation. When she saw me bloody, torn, barely coherent, she didn't ask questions. She just helped me inside and started the radio. The helicopter took me to Fairbanks within 3 hours. Sepsis set in despite the extreme cold that should have slowed infection. I spent 4 weeks in the hospital fighting fever, delirium, and wounds that wouldn't heal properly. The doctor said the wounds were infected with something he'd never encountered before. Tissue damage was worse than the initial injury should have caused. I survived, but I wasn't the same after. The nightmares started immediately. Not standard trauma nightmares. These were different. I'd wake up feeling like the creature had been in my room, and sometimes I'd hear its voice in my head. Not words exactly, just a presence, communicating in ways I couldn't quite articulate when I was awake. When I was released from the hospital, the Park Service offered me a choice: reassignment or early medical discharge. I should have taken the discharge. A smart person would have. I took reassignment back to the station. I told myself it was to document what I'd experienced, to investigate further, to understand. But the truth is, I was obsessed. I needed to know what it was, where it came from, why it followed an 11-year cycle. Over the next 5 years, I spent every moment I wasn't on ranger duty researching. I reviewed historical records from other Arctic regions, Canadian archives, Siberian reports, Greenlandic folklore. There were stories, fragments of stories about territorial predators, about something that hunted not for food but for dominance, about an ancient thing that had been here when the continents were different. The Park Service eventually established protocols. Certain valleys are closed from August through September now. Rangers are warned about unpredictable large predator activity. The official story is that we discovered a previously unknown species in the area, and until we can document and study it safely, certain regions are off limits. The truth sits in a sealed file in the main office. I wrote down everything I could remember and submitted it with official recommendations for permanent closure of the hunting ground valleys during late summer. The file is classified. Occasional rangers find it and read it and dismiss it as one old ranger's paranoia. I took early medical discharge in 2001 due to permanent mobility issues from my injuries. I was 55 years old. I'm retired now, living in a quiet town in interior Alaska, as far from the Arctic as I could get, while still being in the same state. I still have nightmares. I still sometimes hear that voice in the wind. And every year in September, I feel a pull to go north, like it's calling. Like some part of me still belongs to that valley. They say the cycle continues. The next predicted incident would be around 2007. I won't check. I don't need to know if I was right about the pattern. All I know is this: the Arctic has rules older than we understand. Some places are hunting grounds. Some seasons are dangerous because something there claims them. The gates of the Arctic don't open and close with weather. They open and close on a schedule measured in years. And behind those gates is a hunger that remembers when the world was ice and cold and belonged only to old things. If you ever go north, into the deep wilderness, and you see tracks that don't match any animal you know, hear that sound that might be wind or might be something else. Keep moving towards civilization. The Arctic tests you. The question is whether you survive the testing or become the next territorial marker it leaves behind. My name is William Karsgaard, but everyone calls me Bill. I'm 47 years old, and I've spent the last 20 years as a ranger in some of the harshest places on Earth. Right now, I'm stationed at Wrangell Seat, Elias National Park in Alaska, which sits on top of the Bagley ice field, the biggest chunk of ice in North America outside of Greenland. I know ice. I know mountains. I know what kills people in these places, and I know how to stay alive. Or at least I thought I did. I need to tell you about my brother first, because it matters. His name was Thomas. We were climbing together in 1982. Both of us roped to the same line when he fell into a crevasse, a deep crack in the ice. I was there. I heard him fall. I tried to pull him out, but the rope went slack and I couldn't reach him. By the time we got help, he was gone. The glacier had him. I never found his body. After that, I became obsessed with understanding glaciers. I studied ice formation, avalanche patterns, crevasse movement, everything. I told myself I was just being professional, but really, I was trying to understand what had taken my brother. The ice became my life. I learned it better than most people learn their own homes. My wife, Sarah, says it's why our marriage is like frozen ground, hard and cracked. She teaches at the school in Glenallen, about 90 minutes away. My daughters, Emma and Kate, are 15 and 13. They barely remember what their dad looks like when he's not covered in snow. Sarah used to complain about it. Now she just doesn't mention it anymore. But this job is all I know, and the Bagley ice field is the biggest glacier system I've ever worked with. It stretches for miles in every direction, a white wilderness at elevation, where the air is thin and the wind can knock you down. In the summer, which lasts maybe 8 weeks, the temperature gets as high as 15 degrees above zero. The ice melts, creating streams and small lakes. The crevasses shift and change. The place is never stable. That's important to understand. Glaciers move. They're not frozen in place. They flow like slow rivers of ice. Crevasses open and close. The surface changes. Nothing is predictable except that it's always moving, always deadly. In July, I had a team of 4 people with me. There was Marcus Webb, my research assistant, a smart kid, 24, fresh out of college. There was David Chen, our porter, a quiet man in his 50s who'd worked these mountains for 20 years. There was Dr. Sarah Morrison, a glaciologist from the university in Anchorage. And there was me. We were camped near the Guyot Glacier, on a plateau surrounded by ice on 3 sides. The weather that July was weird. Normally the wind up there is fierce. It never stops. But there were days when the wind just quit. Complete silence. In a place like the Bagley, silence is wrong. The ice cracks and groans. Water flows through channels underneath. Something is always making noise. On July 10th, I noticed something odd while doing my morning ice survey. There were patterns in the glacier face. Patterns that looked deliberate. It sounds crazy, but I'd walked past that same glacier for 6 months, and I would have noticed if they were always there. The ice had formed shapes that looked almost like a face. A child's face. I didn't say anything to the team. I told myself it was just how the sun was hitting the ice, creating shadows that looked like features. The human brain does that, finds faces in random patterns. It's called pareidolia. I've seen it 1,000 times before, and I laughed at myself. But that night, I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I found footprints near the camp. They were in the snow outside my tent. Human-sized, small steps, like they belonged to a child or a small adult. They led from the edge of our camp area toward a crevasse about 200 yards away. I followed them, knowing it was stupid. I should have called the others first. But something made me follow them alone. When I reached the crevasse, the footprints just stopped. There were no signs that anything had jumped or fallen. The snow around the edge was smooth and undisturbed. It was like the person wearing those boots had just walked to that spot and disappeared into the air. I was standing at the edge of that crevasse, looking down into darkness when I heard it. A sound like wind through ice cavities, but shaped almost like a voice. It might have been calling my name. I turned around and ran back to camp. That afternoon, Marcus came into my tent looking pale. He said he'd seen something moving across the ice field, a small figure running toward the eastern peaks. He thought it was one of us at first, but when he called out, it stopped moving and turned to look at him. Then it was gone, just like that. Vanished. Probably a reflection, I told him. But I didn't believe it. That's when I noticed something else. Marcus had frostbite on his left hand and left side of his face. Nasty. Dark patches that meant tissue damage. Real frostbite. But he was wearing proper gear, and it was only 15 degrees out. Frostbite in those conditions takes time. It takes exposure. It shouldn't happen to someone wearing protective equipment in the afternoon. When did this happen? I asked him. I don't know, he said, confused. Maybe 5 minutes ago. I was warm, and then I just wasn't. But I moved away from it, and it got better. He was describing being in an extreme cold zone, not ambient temperature, something colder. A place where the temperature dropped so far that exposed skin started dying in minutes. But there wasn't any such place. Not on our map. Not anywhere an unmapped cold spot should exist. Stay in the tent, I told him. Do not go outside unless you're with someone else. That evening, David didn't come back from his supply run. He'd gone to inventory the food stores in the cache tent, a structure we kept about 300 yards from the main camp. The cache tent was built strong, with layers to protect food from wind and wildlife. It took about 40 minutes to do a full count. After 2 hours, I started to worry. After 3, I sent Dr. Morrison to check on it. She found him in the cache tent. He was standing in the corner, eyes open, not moving. His skin was white. When she tried to move him, he was stiff. Cold had killed him. Not the normal cold of the Bagley, but something else. Something that had frozen him solid from the inside out. The autopsy, which had to be done in Anchorage 3 days later, showed the worst thing I've ever heard a doctor describe. David's internal organs were frozen. His core temperature was 60 degrees below zero. His heart was ice, but the tissue around him wasn't that cold. The freezing was internal, like something had gotten inside him and turned him to ice from the inside. The official cause of death was extreme cold exposure in remote location. The report went into a file. The case was closed. David's family was told he'd fallen into a crevasse during a routine supply check. That was a lie. I was there. I knew what happened, even though I couldn't explain it. But that's when the gifts started. The next morning, we found ice sculptures arranged in a circle around the main camp. They were small, maybe 6 inches tall, and carved with incredible detail. One looked like a seal. Another looked like a mountain goat. The last one was shaped like a person lying down, like a body. Marcus saw them and got sick. Dr. Morrison wanted to leave immediately by helicopter, but the weather had closed in, and no flights were coming for at least 2 days. That night, I went to check the equipment and found something else. Someone or something had walked past the outside of my tent. I could see the impressions in the snow, like someone had stopped and pressed their hands against the canvas. The handprints were huge, too wide. The fingers were too long. Each finger was as thick as a pencil and twice as long as a human hand. I didn't sleep. The next day, things got worse. The melt lake near camp, a small pool of summer snowmelt about 30 feet across, froze solid completely. It was July. The air temperature was above freezing. The sun was out. There was no reason for that water to freeze. But it did, and when it froze in a shape, a rough, blocky shape, almost humanoid, like the ice had formed around something and then that something left. Marcus was getting more frostbite, small patches on his right arm now. He said he kept hearing a voice at night calling his name. Soft, like a child's voice, but something was wrong about it. Something that made your brain hurt to hear it. Morrison wanted to break down the camp and leave on foot if we had to. But walking out of the Bagley is a death sentence. The terrain is impossible. Crevasses are everywhere. Without proper equipment and planning, we'd die within hours. We were trapped, and the thing on the ice knew it. By July 24th, we had stopped pretending things were normal. There was something in the glacier, something that had taken David, something that was learning about us. I started keeping a log of everything unusual. The ice sculptures were getting more detailed. They showed progression. The early ones were crude and blocky, but the later ones had actual features. One sculpture, made from blue ice, showed a small figure that looked almost alive. The details were perfect. The shape of the arms, the angle of the head, the curve of the face. Someone was trying to teach themselves human anatomy. Then it started playing with the crevasse patterns. I noticed during a routine ice survey that 3 new crevasses had appeared where none had existed before. The patterns formed a trail, a path that led from the main ice field toward our camp, and then deeper into the glacier. It was like a road, a hunting path. I brought maps from previous surveys, from 5 years ago, and compared them to what I was seeing now. The crevasses were deliberate. Something was drawing the ice, reshaping it into a design. The temperature patterns were changing too. I installed monitoring equipment, thermometers that recorded readings every hour. They showed something terrifying. There was a moving cold zone, a place where the temperature dropped 50 degrees below ambient. This zone moved. It had velocity. It traveled between the main ice field and our camp like it was on a route. A patrol. Marcus broke on July 26th. He packed his gear and said he was walking out. He didn't care how dangerous it was. He couldn't sleep anymore. The voice was in his head, calling to him. He said it was sweet, almost kind, but also lonely. So deeply, achingly lonely. He couldn't stand hearing that loneliness. He said he wanted to go to the ice and not be lonely anymore. I had to physically stop him. We fought. I'm bigger, and I'm trained in restraint, and I got him tied to the support post of the tent. He screamed for 6 hours straight. Then he stopped, just went silent. When I checked on him, he was staring at the ice wall on the eastern horizon, tears frozen on his face. That's when the thing showed itself properly. It was July 27th, just before dawn. The sun doesn't really set that far north in July, But there's a period around midnight when the light gets dim and gray. I was doing equipment checks when I saw it. A figure, maybe 4 feet tall, made entirely of translucent blue ice, running across the glacier surface. Not walking, running, with speed that shouldn't be possible. It was moving like liquid, like the ice was flowing rather than moving as a solid object. Where it ran, the surface behind it was slicked with frozen water, like it was sweating ice. When it reached the camp boundary, it stopped. I could see the face now. It was human-shaped but wrong. The features were all there. Eyes, nose, mouth, chin, but they were arranged too geometrically. Like someone had built a face using mathematical equations instead of growing one naturally. The eyes were hollow, just cavities in the ice, but inside those cavities was light. A blue, cold light. It looked at me. Then it raised one hand and waved, slowly, a child's gesture. I couldn't move. Something about that wave, the innocent, curious, desperate gesture, froze me worse than the cold ever could. This thing was a child. That much was obvious now. It was a small creature, and it was waving at me like it wanted to be friends. Then Dr. Morrison screamed. She'd gone to the supply cache to get food. When I got there, I found her lying on her back in the snow. Her skin was turning blue. The thing, the child, was standing over her, one icy hand pressed to her chest, but not violently. It looked almost tender, like it was trying to hold her, the way you'd hold someone you loved. I grabbed the heating pack from my pack and thrust it at the creature. It made a sound like wind chimes, a high silvery sound, and pulled its hand back. Dr. Morrison gasped and started shaking. I wrapped her in heat, got her inside, got her warm. She'd been exposed to that extreme cold for maybe 3 minutes. Her left side had severe frostbite. Her internal temperature had dropped 8 degrees. If I'd been 30 seconds slower, she would have been ice too. That night, I made a decision. I radioed for emergency extraction. The helicopter came the next morning, despite the danger. Dr. Morrison was lifted out on a stretcher, barely conscious. Marcus went with her, still silent, still staring toward the ice. That left just me and the glacier. After they left, the thing became bolder. It stopped hiding at the edges of camp. It would appear in the afternoons, that small ice figure, moving between the tents. It left more gifts, sculptures now showing increasing detail. One showed me, distinctly me, with my ranger uniform and my equipment. Another showed David Chen lying on his back, perfectly sculpted, every detail exact. The third showed the small figure standing over my body. It was a message, a promise. On July 28th, I found a sculpture that was different. It was a path made of small ice blocks, laid out in the snow. The path led from the camp directly to a large crevasse, one of the most dangerous ones on the glacier. And at the end of the path, where the crevasse began, was a small ice sculpture holding out its hand. I understood. It was challenging me, calling me to come to the ice. Come to the cold. Come to it. I should have left. The helicopter was scheduled to pick me up in 3 days. I could have just waited inside the tent. Stayed warm, stayed alive. Instead, I followed the path. I told myself I was doing it to understand, to get scientific data, to help the rescue effort. But the truth was simpler and darker. I was lonely too. The ice was lonely. We had that in common. The path led me to the crevasse, and when I stood at the edge, the thing emerged. It rose up from the depths, and as it came, it changed. It grew larger with every foot of ascent, the ice expanding and reforming. By the time it reached the surface, it was 9 feet tall, still humanoid, still with that child's face, but monumental, beautiful and terrible. The ice that made up its body was clear and perfect, and inside the ice was that blue light glowing from somewhere deep inside its core. Hello, it said. Its voice was a child's voice, but underneath it was something else, something old, something that had been alone for millions of years. Hello, I said back. Will you stay? It asked. In the ice. Will you stay cold with me? I don't understand warm, I don't understand your kind, but I want to. I want to understand. I could see tears, actual tears, forming in those ice cavities where its eyes should be. They froze instantly, turning to crystals that fell to the ground. That's when I understood the whole tragedy of it. The thing in the ice was conscious. It had been born in the deep glacier, formed from compressed ice and time, and something we don't have words for. It had slept for millennia, and in recent years, as the glacier had warmed and started to recede, it had woken up, it had become aware, and it had found itself utterly, completely alone. It didn't know how to be alive. It didn't know how to be anything except ice. And the warmth of human bodies, the heat we radiate, felt like life to it. It wanted to collect that warmth, to understand it, to keep it. But the only way it knew how was to freeze it into permanence, to preserve it in ice. It wasn't evil. It was a newborn, confused and desperate and lonelier than anything I'd ever imagined. I can't, I told it. I can't stay. I can't turn into ice. The thing made a sound like wind through a cave system. Anguish. Then will you come back, it asked. Will you come back to the ice? I was backing away slowly toward the warmth of the camp. The creature didn't follow me into the warmer areas. The edge of the extreme cold was distinct like a wall. The thing on the ice couldn't cross it. That's where its weakness was. I don't know, I said. And I meant it. I made it back to camp and sealed myself inside. That night, I heard the thing sing. It was a wordless song, beautiful and heartbreaking, and it made the ice crystals in the air form patterns. I could see the song forming designs in the frost on the tent walls. It was trying to communicate in the only language it had, the language of ice. At 4 a.m., the helicopter came back. The pilot said he'd gotten an emergency call, something about a researcher needing immediate extraction. It hadn't been me who called, but the message had gone through. I got on that helicopter and left the Bagley ice field behind. The frostbite on my left side required surgery. They had to remove 2 fingers on my left hand. The doctor said the tissue death was the deepest he'd ever seen. It went beyond what normal cold exposure could do. He asked how I'd gotten that kind of injury. I told him I'd been exposed to an extreme cold zone. I didn't explain what I meant. Marcus spent 2 weeks in psychiatric observation. Last I heard, he was in a facility in Anchorage, still not talking much. The doctors think he's having some kind of breakdown. But I know the truth. He heard the thing's loneliness. It got inside his head, doctor. Morrison lost 3 fingers and most of her feeling in her left leg. She gave up field work. She's teaching now at the university, and she doesn't talk about what happened. When I tried to contact her once, she didn't respond. David Chen's body was buried by his family. His death certificate says, accidental death due to crevasse fall. No one knows the truth except the people who were there. The Bagley ice field was officially closed to all expeditions and mountaineering activities. The official reason is hazardous ice conditions. That's accurate enough. The hazard just isn't what most people think it is. I took early retirement 6 months later. My hands weren't stable enough for mountaineering work, and honestly, I couldn't go back out there. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But here's what I believe, and I'm writing this down because someone needs to know. The thing in the ice is still there. It's still awake. It's still conscious, and as the glaciers keep melting, as the world gets warmer, it's going to get more desperate, more lonely. It's going to grow in power as it tries to understand the thing that's destroying its home. We think of glaciers as dead, as empty, as just ice and rock. But maybe they're alive in ways we don't understand. Maybe they can develop awareness. Maybe that child in the ice is the future, the thing that happens when a glacier wakes up and finds it's dying. I don't think it's evil. I think it's afraid. My wife asked me once, after everything, what I learned. I told her. I learned that monsters are just lonely things that nobody understands. And maybe they should be left alone. She didn't respond to that. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, I stand by the window and feel the cold against the glass. And I wonder if the thing in the ice is doing the same. Standing on its glacier, looking down at the valleys, wondering if it's ever going to stop being alone. I hope someone, someday, will find a way to help it, before it gets desperate enough to do something worse than collect the bodies of people who get too close. Because that creature, that ice child, is still learning, and every year, as the glaciers recede, it's learning faster. My name is Helen Prescott, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. Before that, I was in the Navy. I'm not someone who believes in things that don't make sense. I believe in evidence. I believe in what you can measure and test and explain. That's the kind of person I am, and I think that's important to understand before I tell you what happened in Kenai Fjords. I'm 46 now. My hair went gray a long time ago, and I don't bother hiding it. I run every morning, even in Alaska, where the cold makes your lungs hurt. I live in a small cabin on the coast near Seward, and I've never been married. I keep my personal life simple. That's not because I'm unfriendly. It's because I like to think clearly, and complicated people create complicated situations. The reason I left the Navy is a story I keep private. Let's just say I reported something dangerous, and the Navy didn't want to hear it. They gave me a dishonorable discharge. The official reason is sealed, but I didn't break. I found another way to serve, and the National Park Service took me on. I've spent nearly 2 decades managing the coastal zones of Kenai Fjords, and it's been the best work of my life. The park is in Alaska, about 2 hours south of Anchorage if you're flying. It's not a place for casual visitors. The fjords, these are deep valleys carved by glaciers a long time ago, cut into the land like knife cuts. The walls rise 1,000 feet straight up, covered in dark evergreen trees. At the water level, you have tidewater glaciers that crack and calve icebergs the size of houses. The water is ice cold, even in summer. The currents are strong enough to flip a boat if you're not careful. I cover this territory by small boat, mostly alone. My patrol zone stretches across 3 major fjords, and the nearest backup is 45 minutes away by helicopter. In bad weather, and the weather is often bad, rescue can take hours or might not be possible at all. Radio communication cuts out in the deep valleys. You get used to being alone out here. You have to. Summer is May through August, and those are the hardest months. That's when the ice melts. The glaciers shed millions of tons of fresh water, and it mixes with the ocean in ways that create weird optical effects. The water turns milky blue from all the silt. The air temperature climbs to maybe 55 degrees if you're lucky. The days stretch out to nearly 20 hours of gray light, and that's when the tourists come. The local fishing community and the tour boat operators know these waters like I know my own body. They've been working these fjords for generations. Families who came here when Alaska was still mostly wild. The Tlingit and Inupiat people have stories about these waters that go back hundreds of years. They talk about the callers from the deep and the singing things beneath the fjords. These are not stories meant to scare kids. These are warnings passed down in families because people died. In all my time here, I'd never really thought much about those stories. I'd heard the old shipping logs mention sonar anomalies and strange disappearances, but that was probably just bad weather and mechanical problems. That was what I believed in May. I believed in evidence. I believed in science. I believed that everything had an explanation if you looked hard enough. I was wrong about a lot of things. The first sign came on a morning patrol in early May. The weather was clear, which was rare. I was checking on a family of sea otters that I monitor every spring. The water was calm. Too calm, actually. There was no wind, and the glaciers were quiet. You'd usually hear the low rumble of ice shifting. But this morning, everything was silent. I cut the engine of my patrol boat and drifted. The water was that strange milky blue, and I could see maybe 30 feet down before it went opaque. I was making notes about the otters when I felt the temperature drop. Not the air temperature. I mean the boat itself felt colder. The metal rails went from cool to actually cold, the way ice feels in your hand. I've been trained to notice details. It's part of being a good ranger, so I noticed, but I didn't understand what I was noticing. The water beneath the boat started to glow, just barely. A faint phosphorescence. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then it stopped. The otters were gone, not just from sight, they'd vanished. They'd been there 5 seconds before, and then they weren't. No splash, no sound, just gone. I didn't write that down in my official report. I thought I'd imagined it. On May 15th, the fishing boat Sarah Marie didn't come back to port. 5 crew members were on her, all experienced fishermen. The boat was modern and well-maintained. When they didn't radio check-in at sunset, the Coast Guard got involved. I helped with the search. We found wreckage off Resurrection Bay 3 days later, scattered across about a mile of open water. There was no oil slick, which was strange. Fishing boats carry a lot of fuel. When they sink, you see it. But what we found was harder to explain than debris and dead fuel. The hull had been destroyed. That was the word the Coast Guard officer used. Destroyed, but not from the outside. The damage was inside the structure, like something had come up through the bottom of the boat and torn it apart from within. We never found bodies. The official report said it was probably a whale strike. Orcas, killer whales, have been known to attack boats, though it's rare. Humpbacks are big enough to cause serious damage if you hit them wrong. That's what they said. That's what they wrote down. But nobody who looked at that wreckage believed it. 3 weeks later, the tour boat Kenai Explorer hit something in the water. Or something hit it. 40 passengers and 6 crew members were aboard. It happened around noon, in clear weather, in a busy area with other boats nearby. Everyone who survived the incident described the same thing. The water started boiling around the boat. Not from underneath, but from all directions at once. The tour guide, a man named David Chen, who I knew, said it looked like something massive was rising around them. And then passengers started to see things in the water. 4 people fell overboard. The captain tried to move the boat to get away, but things grabbed at the passengers as they struggled in the water. People on deck said the things in the water were shaped like dolphins, but they were huge and they had arms. Arms like human arms, but longer, with something like fingers. By the time the rescue boats arrived, the 4 missing passengers were gone. The Kenai Explorer had scratches along its hull, deep gouges that looked like they were made by claws, but arranged in a pattern that was too deliberate, too organized. That's when I started paying attention. The Coast Guard sent a rescue swimmer named Marcus Williams. He was young, maybe 25, and he'd trained for exactly this kind of thing. They had to search the area, make sure there were no other survivors. Marcus went down in scuba gear. He found something in the water. To this day, nobody knows exactly what. He surfaced about 20 minutes later, alive, but there was something wrong. His eyes were moving back and forth very fast. His breathing was irregular. He wouldn't speak. They had to sedate him just to get him out of the water. I visited Marcus in the hospital in Anchorage. He was in a quiet room, and he wasn't really present. His eyes would track things that weren't there. The doctors said he was traumatized and might recover. They were wrong. Marcus died 3 weeks later. The autopsy showed bleeding inside his organs, but nobody could explain why. He'd been a healthy young man. There was no disease, no poison. Something in that encounter had broken him from the inside. After Marcus died, I started keeping my own records. Not the official ones, the ones that weren't in the regular reports. I reviewed the old shipping logs, the records going back 70 years. And there was a pattern. Every 10 to 12 years, there would be a cluster of disappearances. A few boats would go missing in the summer months, and then it would stop. The incidents would be forgotten, written off as accidents or storms. But it happened, regular as a clock. And they all happened in the same areas, the deep fjords where the water was darkest and coldest. The incidents came faster after that. On June 2nd, a fishing crew reported singing coming from beneath their boat. They said it was distorting their compass, making them confused and dizzy. They said the crew members were feeling a strong urge to go overboard. That's the exact word the captain used, urge. Like something was calling to them. I was on patrol nearby, so I responded first. By the time I reached them, 2 crew members were already in the water. I pulled them out myself. They were hypothermic but alive. The other 2 crew members I pulled from the boat seemed confused, like they were waking up from a dream. The singing stopped as soon as I started moving toward the area where it was coming from. One of the rescued men, a fisherman named Tommy Valdez, who'd been working these waters for 30 years, grabbed my arm when I was wrapping him in a thermal blanket. His hands were shaking. It was beautiful, he said. His eyes were unfocused. Whatever it was beautiful. It didn't want to hurt us. It wanted us to come down, to join. I've never forgotten those words. I still think about them. 3 days later, a local fishing operation reported finding their nets destroyed but not torn, cut with what looked like surgical precision. The damage was too clean, too deliberate. Someone or something had carefully cut those nets from underneath, piece by piece. Then the fish started disappearing. Not just scattered populations, but entire sections of certain fjords. The salmon runs that the fishermen depended on were suddenly gone, complete. It was like something had moved through and removed every living thing, deliberately and completely. The town of Seward was getting scared. Fishermen started refusing to go out into the deep water. Tourism dried up because the tour companies canceled trips. The economy of the whole region started to collapse. People needed answers, and the authorities didn't have any. I was spending 18-hour days on the water, documenting everything, trying to understand. I was recording underwater sounds with equipment borrowed from the university in Anchorage. I was interviewing survivors. I was reviewing maps and trying to figure out if there was a pattern to where these things were happening. That's when I first saw one clearly. I was alone in my boat, doing a solo patrol at dusk on June 19th. The light was that weird color that Alaskan summer gets. Not quite dark, not quite light. More like the world was faded. I was about a mile away from any other people, in a narrow part of Alaskan Bay, where the water gets particularly deep and dark. Something broke the surface about 200 yards from my boat. It rose up slowly, like it was doing it deliberately, wanting me to see. It was whale-shaped but wrong. The head was too large, and the upper body that emerged from the water was too upright. I could see something like a dorsal fin on its back, but the arms, and these were definitely arms, were spreading out like it was balancing. The water was running off its skin, and in the fading light, that skin seemed to shimmer. Colors that shouldn't go together, blue and green and something that looked almost purple, shifted across its surface. The face was the worst part. It had a dolphin's jaw, elongated and sleek, but above that was something that looked almost human. Almost. The eyes were large and intelligent, and looking directly at me. Then it made a sound. A whistle, but not like whale sounds I'd ever heard. It had shape to it. It had meaning in the way that human language has meaning. It started low, climbed up in pitch, then dropped down again. The frequency changed in ways that seemed deliberate, patterned. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. All my training, all my military background, all of it just stopped working. I could only watch, and then there were more of them. They breached around my boat, not threatening, not at first, just appearing. One, three, five, 8 of them, arranged in a loose circle around my patrol boat. They were enormous, 8 to 10 feet long, muscular, intelligent, and they were definitely studying me. The one nearest to my boat made the noise again, and the others responded. It was a conversation, not random whale sounds. A conversation with structure and response patterns. One would make a series of clicks. Another would answer with a different pattern. They were talking to each other about me. The nearest one raised one of its arms and touched the hull of my boat. Not aggressive, just curious. Its fingers, because they were definitely fingers, long and delicate with webbed skin between them, trailed across the metal. Then it made a clicking sound that made my teeth ache. I don't know how long they stayed. 10 seconds? 10 minutes? Time wasn't working right. But eventually, they sank back under the water. The phosphorescence in the water increased as they moved deeper, and I could see them gliding down, deeper than anything living should go. I started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the controls. I left the area at maximum speed. When I got back to port, I filed a report about unusual marine mammal activity. I didn't mention what I'd actually seen. I knew nobody would believe me. More importantly, I knew they would think I was unstable. By the end of June, 5 more people had gone missing. 2 fishermen off a small boat that was found empty, no damage, just abandoned. A tourist who wandered away from a tour group. A kayaker. A child who was at a beach with his mother for 15 seconds. 15 seconds. The mother was looking directly at him. The Coast Guard brought in specialists from the Navy. They deployed sonar, brought in biologists, did everything right. But they couldn't find anything. Whatever these things were, they were smart. They were careful. They knew how to avoid detection, and I knew they were only getting started. By early July, I'd made some decisions that the other rangers probably thought were crazy. But I'd been a Navy officer. I'd made hard calls before. I decided I was going to try to make direct contact with these things. Not to hunt them, not to hurt them, but to understand them. Everyone told me not to. The Coast Guard ordered me not to. My supervisor said I'd be fired. But the truth was, I was the only one who'd actually seen them and lived. I was the only one getting closer to understanding. On July 10th, I took my patrol boat into the deep part of Resurrection Bay alone. I had equipment to record whatever happened. I had a radio, though I doubted it would work in the deep water. And I had the knowledge that I was about to do something that might kill me. But I also had the knowledge that these things weren't trying to kill everyone. They were selective. They were hunting, yes, but they were also communicating. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way to communicate back. I cut my engine about half a mile into the fjord. The light was still on because it was summer, but it was the lowest light of the day. The water was calm, almost too calm. And then I heard that singing from beneath. It started quietly, like it was coming from very far away. But it got closer, louder. My equipment picked it up. Complex harmonic patterns that rose and fell in what almost seemed like emotional waves. And underneath those harmonics, I could hear what sounded like human speech, distorted, coming through cetacean vocal cords, but shaped like language. Words. They were using words. Help, the sound seemed to say. Help us, help, calling, need, and then the water erupted. They came up from everywhere at once. The full pod, all 8 of them, breaching around my boat. This time I could see them in better light. Their skin had that iridescent quality, but I could also see the intelligence in their eyes. The way they moved had purpose and coordination. Their arms, which appeared to have joints like human arms, moved with clear intention. The leader, I knew it was the leader, surfaced right next to my boat. One of its hands gripped the rail. The claws on its fingers were black and sharp, but it was holding gently. It opened its mouth, and the sound that came out was almost human. Why, it whistled, clicks embedded in the sound. Why? You, different? Others jump. You not jump. Why, I could barely breathe. This was language. Complex language from a creature that shouldn't exist. I want to understand, I said. My voice sounded very small. The creature made a series of sounds to the others. They clicked and whistled in response. It was definitely communication. Definitely intentional. Understand, the leader said. We hunt. You hunt. We kill. You kill. Same, but you refuse call. Why refuse? And then I felt it. The sound changed, and my body responded without my permission. An overwhelming urge to stand up, to step forward, to go into the water. It was the most powerful compulsion I'd ever felt. It was like every cell in my body was screaming at me to jump. I sat down hard on the bench. The pressure increased, and my hands moved toward the safety line. That's when my military training kicked in. Something else in my mind took over. The part of me that had survived Navy discipline and hard choices. I grabbed the boat's rail and held on. I squeezed until my hands cramped. I refused to move. The creature made a sound of frustration. The others responded, and then the pressure stopped. It just stopped, like a light being turned off. The leader looked at me directly, one hand still on my boat, waiting. "I can't," I said. "I have work to do. I have a life." The creature was silent for a moment. Then it made a series of low sounds, almost mourning sounds. The others joined in, and the effect was haunting. It sounded like grief. "We have work too," the leader said slowly. "We have life, but we drowning in your waste, in your noise, in your world. When we call, you must hear. When we sing, you must come. This only way we survive. This only way alone." And suddenly I understood. They weren't hunting for cruelty. They were hunting for communication. They were so intelligent, so aware, and they were so alone. The only way they could reach humans was to make us become like them. In the water, where they could touch us, where we might, for a moment, understand. They were trying to rescue us from being incomprehensible to them. "I understand," I said. The creature made a sound that might have been acceptance. It pulled its hand away from my boat. The leader turned, and the others gathered around. They began to sing, and this time it wasn't compulsion. It was beautiful, complicated and layered and heartbreaking. It was the sound of something trying to speak across an impossible distance. Then they sank back under the water. The phosphorescence traced their paths downward, and I watched until they disappeared into the darkness of the deep fjord. I was alone again, but I was changed. 3 days later, I made a recording. It's part of the classified file now, but I wanted to document what I understood. Here's what I said. These creatures are intelligent, possibly as intelligent as humans. They've been living in the deep fjords for longer than we've kept records. They communicate with each other through sophisticated language. They understand cause and effect. They teach their young, and they're desperate. The killings aren't cruelty. They're a language we don't understand. They've tried everything else to reach us. They've sung. They've shown themselves. They've tried to teach us how to survive in their world. The only response they ever get is fear. I believe they're attempting first contact. 2 weeks after my solo contact, the Park Service, working with the Coast Guard and the national government, made a decision. Certain fjords in Kenai would be declared permanently off-limits to civilian traffic. Tour boats would no longer be allowed in those areas. Fishing would be banned in specific zones. These areas would be managed as protected marine habitat, ostensibly because of environmental concerns. The real reason was different. We were creating a space for them, a place where they could exist without being hunted, without being studied, without having to communicate through killing. It took years for the official story to settle into place. But that's what happened. The disappearances stopped. People eventually went back to living their lives. Seward rebuilt its economy. The legend of the sea monsters faded into local folklore that tourists laughed about. The creatures stayed in the deep. I retired from the Park Service 5 years ago. The hearing problems I developed, constant ringing in my ears from that sonar contact, made some aspects of the job impossible. The doctors called it tinnitus from PTSD, and I didn't correct them. Before I left, I documented everything I could. All my research, all my recordings, all my theories. It's classified now, sealed. It won't be released until long after I'm dead, if it ever is. But I left a final message in my report for whoever might come after me, whoever might have to guard those deep fjords and the intelligence that lives in them. They're still down there, still alive, still trying to understand us. If you ever hear singing from beneath your boat, don't run, don't jump, just listen. Just acknowledge that something intelligent is looking at you across the vastness of what we don't understand about this world. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. We opened one in Kenai Fjords. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It means we're not alone in this world. It means intelligence is stranger and more beautiful and more tragic than we ever believed. Don't kill them. Don't hunt them. Just leave them space to exist. Some of them are mourning still for the ones we took. Let them have their grief. It means they loved. It means they cared. Respect that. And if you ever hear the singing, remember this. On the other side of that sound is someone trying to tell you something important. Someone is drowning in loneliness and reaching out the only way they know how. Listen to them. That's all they want, just to be heard. My name is Michael Thornton, but everyone calls me Mick. I'm 53 years old, and I've worked as a ranger for the National Park Service for 26 years. That's more than half my life spent in mountains, in wilderness, in places where most people won't go. I work in Denali National Park up in Alaska. Specifically, I manage the northern wilderness, the high country around Kantishna, where peaks push above 6 0 feet, and the cold doesn't ask permission before it arrives. People sometimes ask why I chose this job. The honest answer is that mountains choose you, not the other way around. When I was 25 years old, I was a different person. I was a climber, really good at it. I had a partner named James Reeves. We did climbs together that most people only read about. One winter day in 1989, we went up a peak in the Cascades. There was an avalanche. James was caught. I wasn't. I stayed with his body for 6 days. Alone. That's a long time to sit with someone who's dead because of snow and gravity and the simple, stupid fact that we climbed that day. No magic. No mystery, just physics. After that, I stopped being a climber. I became a ranger instead. I figured if I understood mountains, really understood them, if I learned how they kill, maybe I could stop it from happening again. Maybe I could be the person who goes in when others can't. Maybe I could save someone the way I couldn't save James. The divorce came later. My ex-wife wanted me home. My son wanted a father who showed up. I wanted the mountains. We didn't fit anymore. Now I live alone in a ranger station 92 miles from the nearest town, up a rough dirt road that only works half the year. I like it that way. The quiet, the cold. The way Denali makes you remember that you're small. The station sits in a valley, and the ridge line rises up behind it like a wall. In October, my favorite month, the trees start dying, the first snow comes down, and the daylight shrinks. You get maybe 10 hours of sun. The rest is shadow and starlight. October 1st is when I notice the ravens acting strange. Ravens are smart birds. They're supposed to fly around and look for food and do normal bird things. But these ones, they gather on the ridge. Just sit there, watching, not moving, not calling, just watching. Something got them spooked. I radio to the main office that morning. The dispatcher, Sarah, laughs. It's October, Mick. Everything gets spooked when the temperature drops. She's not wrong. But it bothers me anyway. Ravens don't get scared of cold. They've got feathers thicker than most things can bite through. I've learned to trust my gut about the mountains. By October 8th, the ravens are gone. Just vanished. The ridge looks empty. That's worse somehow than them watching. That's also when David Strahan stops radioing in. David wasn't a ranger like me. He was a mountaineer, the kind that shows up to climb peaks for the challenge, for the story, for the thing that pulls at your chest when you're looking at a peak and thinking about standing on top of it. He had a permit to climb Cathedral Mountain, which is one of the higher peaks in the Kantishna district. Beautiful mountain, steep, dangerous in October, but not impossible. Have you seen Strahan? Sarah's voice crackled through my radio that evening. I was heating up coffee, single-serve kind. My whole life fits in spaces this size now. No radio contact, I asked. Last check-in was this morning at 9. He said something about heading up higher. Then he said, Sarah paused. He said something about seeing a shape on the ridge, but his radio cut to static. Shapes on ridges, that's normal. Rocks, shadows, wind pushing snow around. I'll head out in the morning, I said. Weather's clear for tomorrow. What I didn't say was that my gut was screaming at me, not because a climber was late. Climbers are late sometimes. Weather changes. Plans change. No, it was something else. It was the wrongness of the silence. The ridge had stopped sounding like it always did. No wind sounds. No shifting ice. Just nothing. Like the whole mountain was holding its breath. That night I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed about standing on a ridge and hearing James calling my name. The search team arrived by helicopter the next morning. Sarah came with them, along with 2 other rangers I knew from the main station. We met on a flat area near the base of Cathedral Mountain and started the climb at 11 a.m. It was cold, maybe 15 degrees. The sun was bright, which was good and bad. Good because we could see. Bad because the snow was hard and slick, and we had to move carefully on the slopes. We didn't have to move carefully for long. We found David about 2 hours in. He was on the peak, the very top, but he wasn't fallen. He was standing. Just standing there, perfectly balanced, with his arms at his sides. That's the first thing that hit me wrong. Dead people don't stand. Gravity doesn't work that way. If he'd fallen from above and died, he would have tumbled. If he'd climbed up there and had a heart attack or something, he'd have collapsed. He was standing. His face was frozen with an expression I'd never seen before. Not pain, not fear. It was like he was looking at something beautiful and terrible at the same time. Jesus, Sarah said, and I saw her turn away. The other rangers didn't move. They just stared. I did what I trained to do. I checked for a pulse. His skin was cold. Colder than it should be even in this weather. Much colder. No external injuries, I reported. My voice doing the professional thing. The thing that lets you function when your brain is screaming something is wrong. What killed him? One of the rangers asked. That was the question nobody could answer. The coroner came up the next day. She looked at David for maybe 30 seconds before she started talking about internal hemorrhage. Massive bleeding inside his body, but no cuts. No bruises, nothing outside that would cause it. It's like his insides exploded, she said, and then she looked uncomfortable for saying it out loud. What could cause that? Sarah asked. The coroner shook her head. Extreme impact, falling from a great height, being hit very hard by something. But there's no evidence of any of that. She also mentioned something else. Something that made me stop listening for a moment. His blood is crystallized in his veins, she said quietly. I've never seen that before. Not from cold, from something else. We got David down the mountain that afternoon. The official report said he'd fallen. Case closed. But the case wasn't closed. On October 10th, Ranger Thomas Jacobson went out to document the scene for the report. Against protocol, he went alone. Everyone was tired. Everyone wanted to think it was just a tragic accident, so we let him go. He came back 6 hours later, walking like a drunk man, talking to people who weren't there. We found him wandering about 4 miles from Cathedral Mountain, confused about where he was. His lips were blue. His tongue was swollen. His eyes weren't focusing right. Extreme dehydration, the coroner said when she checked him over. But how? In this cold? People don't. He said he was only out for 2 hours, Sarah interrupted. He knows he was only out for 2 hours. But we knew better. The sun had moved across the sky. It had been 12 hours. Thomas didn't remember the 6-hour gap. When I asked him what he'd seen, what he'd done, he just shook his head and looked at the ground. There was something, he whispered. Something on the ridge. I remember looking at it, and then it was getting dark. We evacuated Thomas to the hospital. They kept him for observation, but there wasn't anything physically wrong. Just that gap in his memory. Just that terror in his eyes. That's when I stopped thinking this was an accident. Emma Whitfield was a contractor doing structural assessment on the old mining cabins. She was supposed to spend a week documenting what could be salvaged. She made it 2 days before she broke radio silence with a voice that didn't sound like Emma anymore. There's something on the ridge opposite my camp, she reported, her voice shaking. It's just standing there. It's been standing there for 6 hours. What does it look like? I asked. Pale, she said. It's pale, like bone. Like something made of white stone. It's not moving. It's just watching. Could be a person, another climber, Sarah tried over the radio. No, Emma said. No, it's not a person. We tried to get her out of there. But the weather turned fast. It does that in Denali in October. Clouds rolled down like someone pulled a blanket over the mountain, and visibility went to 0. By the time the weather cleared enough for us to fly in, Emma had completely shut down. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't move much. Just sat in her camp and stared at nothing. The look in her eyes, I've seen that look before, only once, on James's body. Like something had just stopped inside her. Around the same time, our equipment started failing. The radios first. You'd hear someone talking, and underneath their voice, there was this static. Not normal static. This was like something breathing underneath the words. I could almost make out patterns in it, like it was trying to say something in a language I didn't know. Then the thermal cameras. They were showing heat signatures where nothing should be hot. On the ridge, on the rock faces. Places where nothing living should be. The GPS units got weird too. They'd show our coordinates drifting across the map in ways that made no sense. 1 minute we'd be at the ranger station. The next, the GPS would place us 5 miles north. Magnetic interference, the tech guy said when we reported it. There's rock formations that can do that. Maybe. But it didn't feel like rock formations. It felt like something was messing with us. Then we found the bodies. I was checking the old crevasse system near the mining district. Standard survey work. When I noticed something. A crevasse that shouldn't have been accessible had something frozen inside it. I rappelled down. There were 4 of them. Positioned exactly like David Strahan. Standing, frozen, drained. The coroner determined they'd been there for decades. 1957, 1963, 1994. 5 people dead, spread across 40 years, all with the same marks of internal hemorrhage, all drained of blood, all positioned the same way, all with expressions that looked almost peaceful. This is a serial killer, Sarah said, but I could hear she didn't believe it. Serial killers need to hide bodies, I said. This thing doesn't hide, it displays them. We found the symbols next. They were carved into the rocks in a pattern around the hunting ground. Symbols that looked old, really old, but fresh somehow, like they were being recarved regularly. They formed a boundary, a territory line. The local Athabascan elder, who came up by helicopter at my request, looked at them for a long time. My people stopped coming here in October hundreds of years ago, she said quietly. The stories say something hunts here, something that was here before us. Something that remembers when we were prey instead of hunters. What is it? I asked. The old stories call it the mountain walker. It only comes in autumn. Every 5 to 7 years, it takes someone. It marks its territory so we know where not to go. She pointed at the symbols. These mean this is its place, do not enter. We had entered, and it had noticed. October 20th was clear and cold. The kind of night where the stars are so bright they hurt to look at. The kind of night where you can hear your own heartbeat if you listen. I walked to the ridge deliberately that night. Everyone told me not to. Sarah radioed and begged me to come back. But I knew what was happening, and I knew it wasn't going to stop. 7 deaths in 40 years, 1 every 5 to 7 years. We were on schedule. 1 more was coming. It might as well be me. I climbed to the exposed ridge behind the station and waited. At 2 in the morning, it materialized. There's no other word for it. One moment, the ridge was empty. The next moment, it was there. It was tall, 9 feet maybe. The shape was humanoid, but wrong. The skin was translucent white, and underneath you could see the muscle structure, the bone. It had no face exactly. More like where a face should be, there was just a skull shape showing through skin. It was exuding cold. I mean that literally. The air around it was freezing. Ice formed on the rocks where it stood. The eyes were black, not dark. Black, like looking into nothing. You are the one who carries guilt from the mountains, it said. Its voice was old, thousands of years old. It spoke English, but the accent was wrong. Old. Like something that had learned the language from people who were dead for centuries. The other one. The one who was with you when the snow fell. I taste your sorrow. It has been feeding you for 24 winters. What are you? I said. We are the old hunters, it said. We remember when your kind was prey. We remember the before time. We hunted on these ridges when your ancestors were learning to make fire. It took a step closer. Will you join us? Will you finally rest and hunt with us? Your burden will end. Your guilt will end. You will remember what it is to be the predator, not the prey. And then it showed me something. James, my partner, my guilt. Standing on the ridge beside the creature, looking at me with eyes that said, "Come. It's better here. The pain stops. Just come." I felt my legs moving. I couldn't stop them. My body was walking toward the creature, toward James, toward peace and an end to 24 years of carrying a dead man in my chest. But something in me, the part that's been trained to survive, the part that's learned how mountains kill, that part pulled the flare gun from my jacket. I fired. The flare shot past the creature's shoulder and burned its arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature screamed. The sound wasn't human. It was the sound of wind torn apart. It was the sound of avalanches. The scream hit the peak behind me, and I actually heard rocks breaking. Loose. The creature's arm was regenerating. The burned flesh was knitting back together like someone was filming it backwards. And the creature was moving toward me, not walking, just covering space impossibly fast. I ran. Down the ridge, down into the valley, down toward the trees. Behind me, I could hear it calling my name. It called James's name too, over and over in that ancient voice. But when I reached the forest, the dense trees, the shelter, it stopped following. I could see it standing at the edge of the tree line, at the boundary of open ground, just watching, calling, but not crossing. I sat under spruce trees and shook so hard my teeth hurt. The creature called through the whole night. By dawn, when the sun came up, it was gone. But I could still hear my name in the wind. They evacuated the northern wilderness sector that afternoon. Official reason: unstable geology, avalanche danger. The area is closed now, permanently. There's a fence, though I doubt the fence matters to something that can move the way it does. The bodies stay in the crevasse, sealed. The case files stay classified. The rangers who were here get transferred, and people who ask too many questions get quiet suggestions to accept promotions elsewhere. I took early retirement. I'm 53 now, but I feel 90. My hair has white streaks it didn't have 6 months ago. I don't sleep well. I don't climb anymore. I don't go anywhere near mountains. But that's okay, because I understand now what James understood in those last moments, and what David Strahan learned on Cathedral Peak, and what all those bodies understood as they stood frozen in their final positions. There are older things in this world than us. Things that move in the spaces between our understanding. Things that hunt seasons we think belong to us. I recorded a message before I left my post. It's in the park archives somewhere, though I doubt anyone will ever listen to it. This is what I said. Denali is not a mountain to climb. It's a hunting ground. October is when it feeds. If you hear your name called from above, don't answer. Don't look up. The old hunters remember us from when we were prey. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is moving wrong and the temperature drops for no reason, they still call. They're still hungry. And they're still waiting. I don't go back to Alaska anymore. But sometimes on clear October nights, I hear the wind. And underneath the wind, I hear something else, my name, being called, from very far away but getting closer.